who is so gracious. We are in her district this evening. Councilmember Rutherford. And last but certainly not least, Councilmember Nash. And with that, this is what you can expect this evening here. So Dave Rosenberg is going to walk through the legislative history of LPRs. From there, you will hear from Metro Nashville Police Department, and then we will pivot to the Community Review Board. We will have a Q&A session, and I think most of you have noticed there are note cards in your seat. So as questions arise during the presentations, feel free to write your questions on those note cards. There are several of the mayor's staff. Please raise your hands. We will be around as your questions. As you've written them out, we'll come grab those up. And then Brian will make sure that those are addressed during the Q&A. Any questions? All right, with that being said, Dave Rosenberg, you're up.
Thanks. Good evening. Thank you all for being here for night 2 of our world tour. We're here to talk about license plate readers. To start with, license plate readers are high-speed computer-controlled camera systems that are typically mounted in the public rights-of-way, on mobile trailers, or on police cars. They automatically capture license plate numbers that come into view, along with the location, date, and time, and with some systems, photographs of the vehicle, driver, and passengers, though MNPD can talk about the systems that they're actually interested in using. And then the images are uploaded to a central database, analyzed, and stored. In 2017, Metro Council created our first policy around surveillance equipment. The council voted 25-2 on a bill that created a bunch of guidelines, and it included an outright ban on the use of LPRs by law enforcement. Then in February of 2022, after a series of contentious conversations and a graveyard of unsuccessful bills, voted 22-14 to allow the use of LPRs by law enforcement for specific uses, but that started with a 6-month pilot program, after which the council would reevaluate whether to continue with the program. Those specific uses are felonies and violent criminal offenses, drag racing, stolen vehicles and stolen plates, amber alerts, and silver alerts. Then in March through August of 2022, the council voted unanimously in support of bills that ensured that the COB had access to pilot program data and cleaning up some of the language in the ordinance, voted 32-1 to exclude immigration enforcement as an allowed use, and voted unanimously to exclude abortion enforcement as an allowed use. And then in August of 2023, following the conclusion of the pilot program, council voted 24-14 to make permanent the use of LPRs by law enforcement. And that brings us to where we are today, where the conversation is where we go from here. Right now, the council would need to approve any contracts to actually implement those LPRs. And we've got MNPD and CRB both here to talk a little bit about LPRs and how they operate. So turn that over to you. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Lieutenant Ricky Huddles from the Metro Nashville Police Department. I am part of the Crime Control Strategies Bureau. This is my captain to the left of me, Captain Stephen Duncan. He's over the Investigative Support Division. We are part of the Community Safety Center. Additionally, I have with us Commander Carlos Laura. He is the future commander of the Southeast Precinct. So as we get into it, we're here to talk about license plate readers. I greatly appreciate everyone here to discuss the license plate readers. I've been in law enforcement since 2001, and my personal experience, this is one of the most impressive technologies I've seen. Worked at another agency prior to coming here. So yeah, we'll get right into it. We had a 6-month pilot program to determine, does the technology work? The technology has been around since 1976. It was created in Great Britain. The first stolen car was recovered in 1981, before I was born.
Not before I was born.
So one of the goals Additional goals, like, does the ordinance meet the community needs? Does the MNPD policy provide effective controls? And what is the best way to deploy the ALPRs? How can we adequately manage the program? And which vendors should be used? So these are some examples of the use case, the victim impact of what we did during the pilot. I will say I was personally, like, every historical request came through me. I had to approve it. I was personally involved in this first one. It is a horrible case. It was a college student from Indiana. She went downtown with her friends. She was abducted by some gentlemen out of Chattanooga. Her hometown has LPRs. At this time in Nashville, we had LPRs. When she was abducted, she was taken all along Murfreesboro Road and sexually assaulted, and they dropped her off downtown. Chattanooga, where these persons lived, has LPRs. It was the LPR and the images that were captured by the parking garages that led to these persons' arrests. Both of them are still in custody right now. Good. The program results. So it was a 6-month pilot program, but it took a month to get everything up and running, all the accounts, because you had 24 cameras that were installed, or 24 camera locations. Had to install them. So if you notice, that is $1 million worth of property recovered in 87 vehicles. 14 guns were taken off the street because of this. 112 total arrests. Bring your attention to the juveniles and the adults. The youngest person arrested was 13 in a stolen car with a gun. The oldest was in their 60s. Go ahead. So these are some of the definitions you'll hear tonight. The LPR camera reads. That is the total number of times there was a photograph taken and scanned through the system. Hit notification. The system is NCIC, National Crime Information Center. They made a TV show about it. That is where all the stolen cars go. That is where all the wanted persons go. That is where the missing persons go. Their license plate, if it's attached to that, it notifies us. That's a hit notification. The hit notifications get read by the officers. That is an alert. We have to, the system automatically checks it, notifies us, this needs human interaction. Check the state, the plate. Is it a category that we, is a qualifying category, one that David mentioned earlier? Once those two officers verify it and they agree, then it is a verified hit. Go ahead. So again, the camera reads it, takes a picture, looks for letters and numbers, goes through the system, compares it to NCIC. If there is a match, we get notified. If the two officers confirm and verify it together, and it's like, yes, I agree, then it gets sent out to the officers. This is the image that the officers see. That is a stolen car. It was traveling down Korean Veterans, coming up to, they were preparing for the Grand Prix. So, Chief Drake, one of his core pillars is precision policing. This system, 24 locations across the city, 71 million license plates were ran. They were read and compared to the NCIC system. Out of that, 112 arrests came of it. Notice there's 103 that had local history. That means there's 9 with 0 arrest history. One of those being the 13-year-old that had never been arrested before. But when he was, it was in a stolen car. So the question comes up, what resources can we provide for that child so this doesn't happen again? Something is lacking. Okay. From August to December of last year, we had close to 3,000 hit and runs. 40 of those serious bodily injuries, but 10 fatal crashes in that time frame, 8 of which still remain unsolved. Not for lack of trying by the detectives, but lack of evidence. Good. These are some of the hit and run victims that are mentioned here. I want to bring your attention to Murfreesboro and East Thompson. It's the last one at the bottom. That was a pedestrian getting off the bus. The WeGo bus had cameras on it. We have cameras in the area. There were a bunch of witnesses. Still goes unsolved. I mentioned this one specifically because we did have an LPR at that location. But at the end of the pilot, we took them all down so that it can be voted on. These are hit and run locations. And the next slide is the hit and run crashes that ended in a fatality. This is just a list of locations. There's Lebanon Road, Old Hickory Boulevard, and Gallatin and Harris Street. For some reason, high pedestrian traffic and multiple persons that were hit. All right, getting into the quadrants. So during the pilot, we divided the city up by quadrants. I've got the map right here, and additionally up here. So quadrant A, you notice, is everything north of the Cumberland River. How the quadrants were divided were by population density. So the quadrant A, it's 38% of the total land mass, but it's 23% of the population. This area we're in right now, quadrant C, it is 27% of the population. It is a whole lot more dense in this area. There's a lot more people, a lot more traffic. So the quadrants were divided by equal population. So taking those maps, we looked at 13,000 violent crimes between January 21 for a 2-year period. Those violent crimes are homicides, robbery, aggravated assault, gun violence. Half of those, 50% of those, happened within half a mile of 47 locations. So those intersections were identified as this is a good location for the LPR pilot. So once they determined the locations of those 47 locations, again, they had to check and see if the physical location, like the area wasn't blocked by trees, was the IT section available to go there? Will the arm of the street lamp support the camera? But looking at the homicides, rapes, robberies, and aggravated assaults, they developed 24 sites. There are equal cameras in each quadrant. So this was the hotspot map used to determine the 47 locations based on violent crime, about where the densest area of violent crime occurs. And then utilizing that, compare that to the 24 locations and intersections of where the violent crimes occur. So those are the locations where the LPRs were placed, overlaid with the violent crime density. So the authorized uses of the LPR system are gun violence, homicide, assaults, stolen vehicles, traffic offenses, the drag racing and street racers takeovers. That has become a significant issue down here because those meetup and meets lead to more violent crime. Oftentimes we are finding that stolen cars are found in those meets. The Infiniti Q50, I hope you don't drive one because they're a hot commodity right now amongst that crowd. So silver alerts and amber alerts. These are the amount of equipment that we had. We had 24 locations. They all had to be solar powered, cellular powered, or cellular data, and the intersections and the camera had to cover the entire roadway. We had 10 mobile units that were the ones inside the cars, and we had 7 trailers that were there to supplement the 24 locations. This is quadrant A and the high crime areas. Good. Quadrant B and the high crime areas, and then quadrant C where we're in. Hermitage Fairfield, that's way down, but because of the wedge, because of the density, that has a significant amount of crime. Quadrant D, First and Korean Vets, 670 violent crimes within that half mile around that intersection. So Craig Claxton from planning. Generally, with the data provided, we do find the LPR is located in census block groups with a higher share of people in poverty and people of color, but also a much higher share of major intersections and violent crime. While not determinative, this suggests LPR placement focused on violent crime hotspots in major streets. So additionally, these are the quadrants and the home prices within those quadrants nearest to the intersections where they were, like Dickerson and Trinity, $250,000 to $1.8 million. And like this area, Nolensville and 440, you're looking at 110 to 4.7 million for the houses. So the immigration data, the ordinance, like David mentioned earlier, the ordinance strictly prohibits the use of LPRs for immigration data. It is not something we receive. It is completely shut off. We don't use it. The data is deleted completely after 10 days. It is completely gone. Only myself and those within the Community Safety Center receive the alerts, and only 10 employees can view the historical data. So these are the camera locations. This map has been up here. Welcome to discuss it. These are the potential locations for a total coverage system of the area. And next slide is to be economical. We looked at multiple categories we took into consideration after our meetings in January and throughout this year, having these conversations with community members. We took into consideration violent crime, population density, traffic patterns, hit and runs, traffic offenses where those wrecks occur, as well as the public safety cameras. All of this is based off of community input from these community meetings. So I think we'll skip this is a news article that happened within this past month of a recently arrested person. And that concludes I think we'll skip through that. Thank you. I will point this out, lprfeedback@nashville.gov. That is a email that the MMPD has for you have any questions, complaints, concerns, send it to that. If you have a recommendation for where the LPR should be, we'd love to hear from you.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here and a part of these community conversations. My name is Dylan DePriest, and I am the policy analyst with the Metro Nashville Community Review Board. I am joined today by my colleagues, Executive Director Jill Fitchard and Assistant Director Anthony Johnson. So today we'll be talking about the LPR program for Nashville. So a quick agenda of what we'll go through today. We're going to start with a brief introduction about LPRs. Then we're going to go into 3 important points for moving forward with LPRs in Nashville: placement, perspective, and policy. Finally, we will end with a conclusion. So, once again, LPRs are automatic cameras that read the license plates of vehicles that pass through them, turn those license plates into a series of readable letters and numbers, and those readable letters and numbers are put through crime statistic databases to see if they are a match. So importantly, the database that MNPD is using is the NCIC, the National Crime Information Center. And this is important because this is a nationwide database that takes data from federal, state, local, and tribal law enforcement and is heavily audited. So, while LPRs are designed for vehicle-related crime and have immense capability of helping tackle crime for those certain aspects, they also represent an increase in the surveillance apparatus of Nashville. Nashville is overwhelmingly car-dependent, and LPRs have the capacity to track the comings and goings of individuals based on where they are driving through. And you can learn a lot about someone based on their driver history: work schedules, political affiliations, religious affiliations, medical situations, etc. And while there's been no sign of wrongdoing with the pilot program, in other cities across the country, there have been instances where LPRs have been misused for general or targeted surveillance. So they've been used by police departments to conduct data on political rallies, religious organizations, and otherwise legal gatherings. Additionally, there have been instances where police officers have used LPR data to track the comings and goings of ex-spouses, neighbors, business partners, etc. And while LPRs do, again, have the capacity to aid greatly in vehicle-related crime, we really want to make sure that we can both help MNPD achieve their goal of aiding vehicle-related crime, but also account for the very real and valid concerns that the national community has with privacy. So additionally, some of the LPR vendors included in the pilot program have been implicated in civil policy violations in other cities in terms of sharing or selling data to third parties. And additionally, there are no federal policies for governing LPR use. Nashville is in a better spot than most, however, as Metro Ordinance 13880 provides some crucial guidelines and safeguards around LPR use. So, now for some Nashville context. The LPR program ran for 6 months from February to July in 2023, and using data from that program, NCRB, formerly MNCO, released a report on the LPR pilot program. In August, the LPR program was approved by Metro Council for a full rollout. But again, to ensure that LPR are used equitably for Nashville, we want to make sure we talk about some important aspects of how we can make sure we have the best LPR system in the country for both law enforcement use and protecting our community members. So the first aspect of that is placement. These are where the 24 original fixed LPRs were placed during the pilot program. And we see when we map them against US 2020 census block data, we found that those LPRs were placed overwhelmingly in low-income and non-white areas. And here's a map too that shows that distribution across zip codes throughout Nashville. So, beyond the placement, using data from the pilot program, NCRB made a series of heat maps exploring what the LPR enforcement activity looked like across Nashville. And we'll go ahead and define some of those terms in just a moment, but they are listed up there as well. And then each of those categories was once again mapped over that racial and poverty base map of Nashville. But in order to create a comparison, so it's less of comparing apples to oranges, NCRB used MNPD's general stop data from the 6 months of the LPR pilot program to see how LPR enforcement activity compared to general MNPD MNPD activity as it pertained to vehicle enforcement. So these are the different categories up here. So we have total hits, verified hits, vehicle stops, driver or vehicle searches, arrests, and vehicle recoveries. So during the pilot program, we found that, once again, the LPRs were placed disproportionately in non-white and low-income areas, but even with that placement, a vast majority of the LPR enforcement activity we saw was concentrated in Quadrant A. So about 68.75% of all vehicle recoveries were in that one quadrant. Quadrant A was also overrepresented in terms of LPR activity and enforcement. We see that there are roughly 42% of all the total LPR hits in that quadrant, but in terms of vehicle stops, driver and vehicle searches, and arrests, those numbers shoot up into the 70 and 60%. And so once we map those variables onto the heat maps, you can see that here, most of the vehicles recovered during the LPR pilot program were in this Quadrant A. But when we look at, once again, MNPD general vehicle stops from the 6 months as a base rate analysis, we can see that vehicle enforcement activity is happening all across Nashville, regardless of census block distribution across demographics. And so when we look at the individual variables, once again, for enforcement, we see that verified hits, once again, are mostly concentrated in that quadrant A, where the colors are brighter, with some concentration in the southeast portion of Nashville, where we are tonight as well. But when we look at some of the more specific enforcement activities, we can see that when we get to vehicle stops, it pales a little bit in the southeast portion of Nashville, but becomes even more concentrated via the brighter colors in that quadrant A corridor. And then when we look at driver or vehicle searches, that trend holds true as well. And then finally, arrest continues the same trend. So placement is crucial for this full program as we are moving from 24 to an expected 160 fixed LPRs. Since then, MNPD has hosted various community sessions around Nashville in January and February in order to get community feedback on where LPRs were to be placed during this full program. And I think this is a really great step forward for building trust and community input into the LPR process. So we can see the expected placement for the 160 LPRs for the full rollout, and that is also available on that map as well. And in this breakdown, there'll be still an equal number of LPRs represented across all 4 quadrants. And so, based on a brief analysis, because I don't have the exact coordinates to do a heat map, we can tell here that this distribution of placement for the fixed LPRs appears to be more equitably distributed across Nashville, regardless of where certain census block demographics tend to be. And so, one of the main reasons for this is that this placement map appears to follow more general trends like traffic patterns. And we heard from MNPD's presentation before, the apparatus of what constituted the placements of LPRs have changed between the pilot program and the full program that will be rolled out. And I think this is incredibly important as crime statistics alone are not inherently an equitable way to distribute technology or LPRs or any other sort of surveillance apparatus across Nashville, largely to the historical biases present in crime statistic data. And so now we'll talk a little bit more about that with perspective. So while LPRs are valuable for law enforcement to target vehicle-related crime, we also want to make sure that we're addressing the very valid and real concerns that community members have around their privacy, especially as increasing surveillance starts to cross into categories like the First and Fourth Amendment, freedom of movement, and the rights of privacy. And we also want to make sure that we can deal with crime safely, but also that everyone who calls Nashville their home feels safe driving through it as well. And so, to test a little bit about this, MNCO, once again, that was our name before the state legislature, released a survey to members of the Nashville community that tracked various opinions of MNPD and technology use, specifically around LPRs. And interestingly, from that data, we found that overall LPR opinion actually skewed positive. You can see here, 2 represents neutral, anything above is positive, and anything below is negative. And you can see overall LPR opinion is in the positive. However, when we ask questions about how LPRs would affect certain aspects of public trust, public safety, officer behavior, etc., we can see that those numbers tend to skew negative. So what we learn from that is while LPR opinions are overall positive, how they are used and the process and policies behind them tend to actually skew negative. And so from that, we really want the takeaway to be that we need more transparency in the process as we move forward to a full LPR program for Nashville. And so this is one quote from that Technology and Policing survey. I won't read it out because we are limited on time. But we also looked at some private data from a stretch of 10 days. And so from this data, you can see that there's an overwhelming amount of license plate readers being read that are going through Nashville that lead to progressively lower rates of law enforcement activity. And I think this data is really valuable to show just the sheer quantity of data that license plate readers are reading for folks going through Nashville, specifically for folks who have not been implicated in any sort of crime. And finally, our last point that we want to talk about is policy. And so, while strong local policy is crucial, since there are no federal guidelines that govern LPR usage, while there is a Tennessee state code, 55-10-302, that governs some aspect of LPRs on a state level, we do have a much stronger base in Nashville with Metro Ordinance 13880, which once again provides some important regulations, like that 10-day retention period. And so, MNPD also has a specific LPR draft policy for their pilot program. And while I think the policy is a very good start, there are certain aspects that we have identified that could be stronger. So in 84060, clearly defining the NCI hot list as the sole hot list being used, and specifying that MNPD will not use some of the custom hot list capabilities that some of the vendors advertise, would be strong recommendations. Additionally, as it pertains to data with 84070, we want to make sure that there's a no sales clause on any MNPD LPR data, as well as establish a standard disciplinary level for LPR data misuse. And finally, we want to have a clear policy around private LPR integration, data storage, and data sharing, as many community members around Nashville do have private LPRs that they are using. And finally, with 84080, we want to expand the auditing session to include an external audit protocol, and that will be covered here on this next page. So in 13880, we propose an LPR audit committee based on the implicated parties in the Metro Ordinance, namely the District Attorney's Office, the Public Defender's Office, the CRB, as well as having MNPD and a community representative in there as well. So once again, we think this will be a big step forward for improving the transparency and process with LPRs, and thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. I'd like to invite our community partner for today's event from Tennessee Immigrant Refugee Rights Coalition, Judith, to say a few remarks. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Judith Clorjune. I am the Campaigns and Advocacy Director for Turk and Turk Votes. So I will keep it brief, as we, over the past few months and years now, we've shared our concerns, and those concerns in some ways remain the same, but I want to provide some new context. So what we have seen in recent years and recent months is a really concerning and dangerous escalation of the narrative regarding immigrant and refugee communities, right? We have seen time and time again our legislators talk about immigrant communities as invaders, right? We're seeing this border conversations about who immigrants are, getting very, very dangerous and very concerning. And in addition to that, what we're seeing is legislators who are very intent on passing legislation to try and fix what they see as a problem. And while, we all can agree that our border situation has to be updated, we need immigration reform, we need policies that actually address what's happening at the border, a lot of the policies we're seeing from our state legislators do nothing to actually address that, right? They're creating more chaos and making it more difficult for our communities and making it harder. And so a few examples from this past session, we saw a couple bills, one House Bill 2124, which whereas now MNPD are authorized to work with ICE, this goes further and says they are mandated to share information and assist ICE in their work. We're also seeing a trend of the legislature trying to track data, right? There were two bills, one that's requiring the DA's office to create a report on anyone who's undocumented and has been arrested. And then that one just passed both houses today. We also saw another bill that passed the House and is sitting in the Senate Calendar Committee that is requiring all local law enforcement to create a report on all of their interactions with anyone who is undocumented, and to share that with the Department of Safety and also share that with the legislature. So I say all of that to really reiterate our point that while it is I'm very glad that there is an ordinance that passed to say that LPRs cannot be used for immigration enforcement. What we're also seeing at the legislature is that they are intent on using every existing infrastructure to assist in what they see as an invasion, right? And that is going after our neighbors, that is going after immigrant communities. And another point I wanted to make is, if we look at the example of the Tyree Nichols bill that passed regarding pretextual stops, where Memphis tried to limit that, and the legislature went back and said that actually you can't do that. And so I think we have a responsibility to be very aware of the landscape that we live in. Right? While that may be different from other states, we have a legislature who is very intent on using every infrastructure, every means possible to go after immigrant communities. And I think, again, as folks are thinking about how this is going to play out, we really have to be honest with ourselves about the tools that we're creating that can be used to separate immigrant families and go after our neighbors. Thank you.
All right, so we are now going to head into our Q&A portion. As you think about what you heard from both sides, my colleague, Brittany Irby, will collect your cue cards, and we'll begin to read those questions out. If you are ready, you can just pass the cue card to Brittany. All right. So we only have two questions so far. Okay. We'll start with the first one. Implication for LPR use in pretextual traffic stops, given new legislation preventing location from localities from perpetual stops. Okay, sorry. Is that the question?
Yeah, so I think I think you all mentioned something about pretextual stops really briefly, and so I'd love to hear more about, given that cities cannot pass legislation to stop pretextual stops, what does that mean now? Have we thought about how this technology can be used?
Excuse me. The license plate readers are only looking toward stolen vehicles or stolen license plates. Anything, I don't see within my experience any way they can be used for any kind of pretextual stop. That just that would almost be like like an individual thing, not something that would happen from an LPR hit. Or anything that could even be mandated or implemented. I don't see how those two could overlap.
This is just the opposite of pretextual stuff. And if a license plate reader is definitely about some sort of crime.
All right. Thank you.
If I could, yeah. So the information that's being put into the system, Nancy, this information is already in the system. And so the sequence of numbers and letters is put in there to identify somebody who's already been either, part of a violent crime or any of those categories that we have. So the only way that we can't make the LPR do something it's not able to do, we can't, randomly put in people's numbers or information there to stop them. It's already in the system, and all it's doing is scanning to see who's already been put in the system for these specific reasons, and that's when we get a hit. So, and then again, we go through the process of having to get two people to go and verify and go, is this hit a legit hit? And then you go through that process. Once it is legit hit and it falls under our specific requirements or specific categories that we can stop somebody for, then we'll go ahead and stop them. So anything outside of that is, like you said, I don't think there's even a way to even do that with the technology, at least not in our understanding of the technology like that. That makes sense.
I'll read the next.
Oh, can I say something too? Sorry. And I think that question also really highlights the importance of specifying the exclusivity of using the NCIC hot list as the one MNPD is using with the LPR program, as that one is a national criminal information center hot list that is heavily audited. Some of these LPR vendors advertise the ability to create custom hot lists where police departments could incorporate their own entries into those lists and pull from there. So we really want to make sure that the policy we have going forward for the full program makes sure that we can't use custom hot lists, because I think that's what really gets into the gray area of, being another aspect of pretextual stops.
All right, next question. What power would you have toward not handing over the data obtained by the state? Again, what power would you have toward not handing over the data obtained by the state or to the state?
The way I understand it, the state would still have to go through the process of obtaining it, like through a subpoena process and that kind of stuff, to obtain the data directly from us. Once there is a time limit, a narrow window of 10 days, and once it's done, it's done. So they would still have to go through the process, get a subpoena and or a warrant to obtain that data from the systems, but after 10 days, it's gone.
Even if they have that after the 10 days,
It's,
there's nothing that can be done.
yeah.
Okay. Next question. What is the estimated cost savings for the department using this technology?
I think we looked at it previously. I know Chief Blair looked at what it takes to outfit an officer. And you got to think, this technology, it doesn't take breaks. It doesn't take holiday, vacation. It's not an FMLA. It runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So one intersection, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, putting an officer there, and I think an officer with the training, the salary, the vehicle, the technology, is about $200,000 for 1 year, $200,000 a year. So one intersection, you would need north, south, east, and west at that intersection. So $800,000 for 4 officers to north, south, east, and west that intersection to run every tag. And still, that is a person that takes vacation. So using this, it runs in the background. It is a system that, again, doesn't take breaks. It's automatic. Mentioned the precision policing. The only time that there is a notification is if it is a missing person, if it's a stolen vehicle, a felony vehicle. So the officers can spend more time focusing on the crimes that are actually occurring. They can spend more time giving that individual attention to each victim, and they're spending more time taking the reports, talking to each victim, whereas they got the alert to go look for this stolen car, and it narrows down the amount of time that it takes to find it, because we have a specific area. One of the benefits and one of the lessons learned from the pilot was placement does matter. We found that if we had it in a series such as Quadrant A, that had success because we had Dickerson and Trinity, Trinity and Gallatin, and then Gallatin and Briley Parkway. Well, they knew that little elbow, that shape, if it hit this one but didn't hit this one, it's in that area. If it hit Trinity on Gallatin but it didn't hit Gallatin and Briley, it's in Inglewood. that was one of the lessons learned. So the officers had a narrow scope of where to search for it. So the cost savings being is like they weren't aimlessly looking for it. One of the issues that we found out here in South Precinct, in this, Murfreesboro and Bell had a LPR, but the next closest one was Murfreesboro and Thompson. That is a large distance. So it would hit one, never see it again. So I hope that answered it. Okay.
I'd like to go back to the previous question really quickly. When you talked about the 10-day, that you would keep the information for 10 days and then it would just go away, but that's not completely accurate, because if there's an investigation attached to that, then, for instance, if it's a homicide, there's no statute of limitation. That information is secured and kept a part of that investigation. So it is really depending on what types of investigations are attached to the LPR hit.
All right. And in fairness, that was actually the next question. So all good, all good. Save a little time.
I have a clarifying question regarding the last one too. Is this savings that were described, do we currently have officers sitting at intersections waiting on cars or doing that? Right. So, but my concern becomes like this false equivalency of, you know, this dynamic. The technology is the technology. I think our primary complaint is the human components that MMPD refuses to take out of the technology in terms of the server use. It's not tied to a cloud like the industry best practice and things of that nature. I think everyone wants people to be safe, right? And I think that transparency, the desire to produce that end result, needs to put human beings at the center of that conversation, and being, you know, as best we can, as physically responsible as we can be. We need to challenge ourselves to, you know, we want to use technology, but maybe not use it with the same mental models and thinking that we currently use in our current paradigms of policing and things of that nature.
All right. Go to our next question. What is the time frame for the LPR plan to start? And what is the plan in case there are some errors?
So currently we are in the contract negotiation phase with procurement. Once those contracts are established, you know, the vendors, attorneys, and the Metro legal attorneys, they come to an agreement, then those contracts ought to be presented to City Council, and then City Council will vote on it. I'm not sure when the next time that is going to be up for the agenda. But even still, after the contracts are voted on, then it comes back to funding, and then it will implement. So at this point, I think it is Charlie Putton, like what these conversations consist of and how quickly we can get it on the agenda, and, you know, whether procurement and the contracts are agreed upon. So what was the other portion of it?
What is the plan in case the system experiences some level of error?
Such as
errors.
Human error or?
To technology.
Oh, technology.
They didn't specify on the card, but if you want to address both, it's totally fine.
Okay. So that is part of the purpose of the dual verification, that each officer in there, they have to come to an agreement to ensure that before it ever leaves our office, the Community Safety Center, before the officers are told to go out and this is where the car was last seen. You gotta understand that they're on intersections, so there's always going to be a time delay. We could be notified, it's within a fraction of a second up to 2 seconds from the time that we are notified of it, but there is still going to be a time delay that, you know, approximately 20 seconds ago, 30 seconds ago, this car was in that intersection heading this direction. So even still, one of the mitigating factors is that dual verification. But even if the officer goes out there, and they were sitting in that intersection, it's like, yep, I just happened to see it pass, the officer still has to verify the plate that's on the back of the vehicle. It's like, that is just what's a BOLO, be on the lookout for. They still have to go out and find it, and then normal police work, policing takes effect. It is, they still have to get on the radio and say, this is the tag I'm behind, can you run it? They'll run it themselves in their car. As far as the technology and like the misuse of it, it has been discussed that exceptionally severe penalties on anyone who misuses it. There's only 10 persons that have access to the data, and it is significant offense because we don't want to lose that public trust. We are too new, the Community Safety Center and our bureau is too new to lose it, and we don't want to jeopardize anything we have. These conversations within the community that we've already built. So, and as far as the vendors go, I know that we mentioned it yesterday, that is one of the plans, I believe, to have multiple vendors so that in case there is any sort of issue with any of the vendors, we have other vendors that we could move to mitigate it.
The city doesn't get stuck in a contract
with a single vendor.
All right. Absolutely.
And yeah, I think the dual verification is a great process on the front end, but I would once again say that I think for a full LPR program in Nashville, that external auditing body could provide a really good solution on the back end too, in case there is any error, you know, whether it be a technology error, user error, etc. So I think a combination of both those tactics would do a really great job of addressing any sort of problems that may arise both on the front end and back end.
Yeah, and I'd like to just add in here, we talked about in our presentation that there was this team that we're interested in building, one with the DA's office, with our office, with the public defender, including MMPD, and a community member. I think that that is what gives us the most protection when it comes to issues of even human error, hits. We know that these things happen. They've happened all across the country, and we're not excluded from that. I mean, we anticipate that there will be some error in this. So hopefully we can work towards an auditing team where there's lots of checks and balances for the protection of people's civil rights and liberties.
All right. We'll move to the next question. Okay. All right. Has a follow-up question. Did MMPD experience any error in the pilot program?
The only one I know of, there was a temporary plate that was issued to a person, and during the dual verification process, the officer, it was entered as stolen into it, stolen temporary plate off the back of a car. During the verification process, the officer realized, like, hey, this is a stolen plate, but it matches the vehicle it's supposed to be on. They pulled the report, contacted the complainant, and yeah, the complainant on the report had his license plate stolen. He went to the dealership and they reissued him the license plate, the same one that was stolen. So the officers made a phone call to the complainant. It's like, hey, who's in your car right now? It's like, my son. It's like, call him, tell him to pull over, we'll have a conversation with him, we're able to correct it. And that was the benefit of the dual verification process, because when we see something like that, we can slow things down and like, all right, let's take our time, let's get through this. And they were able to remove it and get him an actual plate for it and get that taken out of NCIC. So.
All right. Move to our next question. Of the arrests made during the pilot program, how many of the arrests involved undocumented persons?
If I can answer that. So MNPD doesn't know if people are undocumented or not. We don't ask. One of the things that I think there's a misconception is that because we stop somebody that maybe doesn't have has a passport from a different country rather than a license, that we assume that they're undocumented. Well, there are a lot of people that are here that have passports, have cedulas or birth certificates from other countries that are that are here legally. So you're just because you don't have a U.S. document does not necessarily mean that you are here undocumented. And I think that's where we don't ask those questions and during our daily routine, unless we are in a very specific type of investigation, we don't ask that. There's no reason for us to ask if you're documented or not. We just ask for identification, and whatever identification you give us, that's what we use. And there is no reason, again, for us to even know whether you're documented or not, or if you have documentation, because it's not going to affect our, what we do in our daily jobs. So I think that we would never know that unless there was a specific case that necessitated us knowing that information, which would be a very minute case. That would be something that would be outside of the normal duties, I guess, of an officer, if that makes sense.
All right, thank you. Any more questions before we go to final thoughts and words from our guest presenters? All right. Who would like to go first as far as a final word?
So, we didn't get into the private LPR data, which is concerning to me. I've expressed that to my colleagues here. As we have lots of protections for LPRs that the city has. We have a small amount of protection, if any, for private LPRs. And so there aren't any policies specific to those. And so my concern, and I would say when we're talking about creating policy around the protection of people's civil rights and liberties, that would be included in that process. And that is getting the MMPD retrieving data from private LPRs. And I'll leave you with this, and that is, who's the guardian over the private LPR data? That's what we need to know. That's important to us, and I think it's something that we should explore, and we want to help you do that and create really tight policy around that, because I think that that's what builds legitimacy and public trust into systems. So thank you.
Thank you. MMPD?
I just want to say thank you all for coming out. My philosophy has been, we've done several of these meetings throughout, and my personal opinion is, if I can't explain what we're doing to people, why are we doing it? It takes, and my wife tells me this all the time when we get invitations to stuff, and I'm like, golly, do we have to go? And she's like, yeah, we're going to go. They sent us an invitation. It takes an effort. It takes an effort when you take time out of your day and time away from your families, and you've worked all day to come sit in here and be part of the process. And that's not something that everybody does. So right now we have a mayor that wants your input, and we have the opportunity to all sit here together and discuss things and hear each other's side. And I can say honestly, I've learned something the last 2 nights every time I hear Dylan talk. It makes me understand other people's points of view. So thank you all for taking the time to come in here and talk to us tonight.
All right. Well, with that being said, again, the mayor's office, we would like to thank you all for coming out, and our council members as well. We know that one meeting will not solve all concerns, but it was our hope tonight that you can continue to ask questions, and that you will continue to ask questions. The next meeting that will take place will be on Thursday at IT Crestwell. You're more than welcome to join that meeting as well. And again, I think we have to be out of here by 7:30. So if you have questions that you didn't get a chance to ask, please use this time to engage. And thank you for coming out. Did I miss anything? All right.
The PowerPoint presentation, I know is going to be posted out, but other people have asked about it.
Okay. So where can we find that presentation?
It should be already on the website.
Okay. Nashville.gov. Did everybody get that? Okay. All right. All right. All righty. I think that's about it. Thank you. All right.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.